Hi, everyone. Thanks again for tuning in with us on a How Do I Start conversation that I'm having with one of our partners at Acuity HR, Devan Graham. Acuity HR Solutions is an HR consulting company here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. We specialize in HR consulting, projects, recruitment, training, and workplace investigations. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can visit our website at www.acuityhr.ca. So let's get this conversation going. Hey, Devan, how's it going?
Good. How you doing, Jaysa?
Good. I'm excited to talk about this. This conversation is really for people that are starting into a new HR role. You may not be new to HR in general, or you might be, but this conversation is really about, okay, new HR role, digging in. Where do I start? What's the most important things that I need to address? And I know you've got kind of three areas that we're going to talk about, Devan. So let's jump into the first one.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, coming into a new HR role, it can be a little intimidating. There's a lot that you're trying to understand and learn right away. And often this actually comes up as an interview question sometimes too, right? You always get people that will say, hey, what are you going to do with your first 90 days? Well, here's some things to consider, whether you're the only HR person, whether you're just a new HR person coming in. But I would say, the first thing that you can do and one of the best things that you can do just generally is learn as much as you can about the organization. Try to understand the business, whether it's insurance or manufacturing, what do they do and how do they do it, right? And as much as you can learn, the more effective you're going to be, because as HR, you touch upon and impact all areas of the organization. So the more we learn, the better off we're going to be. So understand the business, understand the goals of the organization. Where are they looking to be in 2 and 3 years? Are they in rapid growth mode, right? Are they looking to grow? Are they looking to train certain skill sets, right? What do I need to understand to make sure that the things that I'm planning and the strategies that I'm figuring out that we're going to need from an HR perspective align with those goals of the organization?
Absolutely. Yeah, those are huge. How would you go about kind of getting that information? Like when you're jumping right in, I know with various clients that we've had, environments are sometimes very different. Sometimes information is widely available. Other times you kind of have to go find it for yourself and kind of experience what the environment is like. So maybe give some examples, Devan, of what sort of information and how would you go find it?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly get your hands on whatever information you can, whether, if you're in a nonprofit, there'll be an annual general report, maybe even a for-profit, there may be some, reports and stuff that they do on an annual basis that you can get your hands on and you can take a look at. Marketing materials that the company uses to promote itself would be great information as well. But I would say one of the best things that you can do would also just be to sit down with members of leadership, right? Sit down with who you report to, and whoever will sit down with you and spend some time, as many leaders in the organization, understand from them what they do, what their team dynamic looks like, what are their goals, what are they looking for from an HR support as well, because that just helps you not only become more well informed about the organization, but it helps you build those individual relationships with the leadership team, which you're going to need their buy-in as you continue to go forward. So start to build those relationships right away.
Absolutely. And getting on the floor. I mean, if this happens to be an organization, let's say it's a manufacturing environment, get an understanding of what's actually going on, talk to people, find out what people's roles are. You may even spend some time actually doing what the organization does. Those are all things that you can do to get a better picture of what's going on from not only that ground level, but also from the leadership side, like you mentioned, because you need to get the goals understood and the buy-in understood too.
Yeah, that's a great example. Previously I was in a manufacturing firm and my role there was to do the hiring and all the sort of internal recruitment. And we had a number of office roles, but we had a number of production roles as well. And every time I had to hire for a different area on the production floor, I would meet with the supervisor and they would walk me through their area and they would show me step by step the flow of their process. They would, I'd talk to the staff, I would understand what they're doing. And the more you can do that early on, as you said, you get to really see things from that hands-on perspective. You get a really great sense of the culture of the organization too, right? And and the values that the organization upholds. And I don't mean values in the sense of those words that you see across the boardroom, which many organizations have: accountability, respect. But what are the behaviors that the organization rewards? What behaviors do they hold accountable, right? What are the daily habits of the organization? And it really gives you a better sense of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And if those opportunities, they may or may not be presented to you, you may not necessarily have it as part of your orientation schedule. So make it
Mhm.
part of it. It's definitely something that, as HR professionals stepping into a new role, we can make that happen. Find out more information and push for the information, because it may not be something that they've done before with someone else, especially if it's a new HR role.
And
Yeah,
the more you do that, the more informed your decisions are going to be, right? When you have to put policies in place or process in place or make decisions that impact the organization, the more you know, the better informed your decisions are, the more you can align them to the goals of the organization, the things that are important to the senior leadership team, and you're just going to be that much more effective in your role.
absolutely. Because if you come in and you're just slinging policies left, right, and center without knowing anything about what the organization wants, or you're starting big projects and spending money here, there, and everywhere, and it's not what's going to be meaningful for that particular organization, you're missing the mark. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
that's awesome. Is there anything about the goal side of things or anything else in kind of this area that we should talk about a little further?
I don't think so. I just think, meet with as many people as you can, talk to as many people as you can, get as much information as you can. It's going to be overwhelming.
Yeah,
But the more you can gather and the more you can understand how the internal dynamics of the organization works, the better off you're going to be. So don't
totally,
be afraid to
totally.
ask questions.
Yes, definitely. I completely agree. Okay, so what else? What's that second area that you were thinking about?
Yeah. So the second area is that risk mitigation piece, right? It's that sort of idea of covering your behind.
Oh yeah.
Uh, and a lot of organizations these days are going more towards flexible environments that have less policies and less structure around some of those things. And while there's certainly a case for that in many ways, there are pieces from a compliance perspective, from an HR perspective, that we do have to be aware of, that we either have to comply with or that could potentially be a liability to us as an organization. So we want to focus on those areas to understand if we have any gaps. And I'm talking about things like respectful workplace, right? Do we have policies for harassment and violence for our organization? And if so, do they match the requirements of the regulations that are out there from, the health and safety regulations, health and safety in general, right? Do we have a policy for health and safety? Do we have a health and safety committee or health and safety representative in place? Depending on the size of your organization, you may require a committee. Do we have that in place? And does that comply with the regulations, right? If health and safety is a part of your purview as HR, often it is. Sometimes organizations may have their own health and safety officer, depending on their environment. Um, you know, Accessibility is one that we've seen
Yeah.
come up in the last few years. There's a lot of new legislation around accessibility that organizations are required to have certain pieces in place around that. So, are you compliant with accessibility? And then, outside of the policy standpoint, I think about things like employment standards, right, which governs, how we operate day to day from a workplace perspective, right? The hours an employee can work, the breaks that they're required to take, vacation that you're required to provide them, those types of things. And some organizations may also have a collective agreement, which may govern that as well. So if you're a unionized environment, looking at your collective agreement, looking at employment standards, do we follow the right practice here? Is there any gaps or any areas where we're not compliant that we want to address right away from that perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot that can kind of come into play with that. And there could be fires that need to be put out before we go ahead and get to the proactive side of things. I know we've worked with a lot of different organizations that have had those situations kind of creep up, and they didn't know about them. Is there any that come to mind for you, Devan, that was kind of one of those ones where you went in and it was almost, I guess I would call it they were blindsided by it, and it was a good thing that it was uncovered.
Yeah, I would say a respectful workplace health and safety is usually the biggest one we uncover with organizations. Most organizations don't have a harassment policy, or if they do, it's not fully compliant to legislation. Most organizations don't realize that you may need a health and safety committee if you've got 20 employees within one location. We typically very common for us to see that organizations don't have a health and safety committee in place. So those are certainly some of the bigger areas that we find. And then I would say, outside of the policy legislation standpoint, there's a couple areas that we flag through work with clients as well that can sometimes be very big areas of liability and risk for the organization. The two that I would say, as a new person coming into the organization would be number one, do you have termination provisions outlined within your employment contract? So when somebody is receiving an offer of employment and signing an agreement to come work for you, are there provisions in there that outline what happens in the event of termination of employment? From a without cause termination, what's the notice period? Whether you want to align that with employment standards, whether you want to be more generous, is that defined before the employee enters into the organization? Because certainly that can be an area that can have a huge risk for organizations if they, are in an unfortunate position where they have to say goodbye to an employee and have to look at doing without cause. And, the employee doesn't have that within their contract. They've never signed off on termination provisions. And there's a lot of factors that can come into play, including case law, which could ultimately mean you have a significant payout to an employee if they've been with you for a long time. So having good termination provisions can help minimize your risk in that area.
Yeah.
And the other one would be overtime. Overtime is one that we
Huge.
see very rarely defined within organizations, especially organizations that maybe don't have formal HR, and they haven't had an issue before, so they just kind of let it go, and and it may always be fine. But unfortunately, sometimes it can come back to bite you, and we've seen that. Where we had one client a couple years ago who had 3 members of their management team leave the organization within about the span of 8 months. And all 3 of them, when they left, handed a bill to, the CEO of the organization saying, oh, by the way, here's all the
Yeah.
overtime I've worked for the last year. And they were tracking it. And, in those situations, if you don't have properly defined structure around, how is overtime approved? Who does it need to be approved by? And some of that language, you can be in a position now where you may potentially owe a significant amount of money to an employee who's departing your organization. So those would be a couple areas to pay close attention to early on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that flags it too, that if you're listening to this and you're realizing, wait a sec, we don't even have employment contracts in place. Those are pieces that we want to make sure that we get in place from a risk perspective. It can be, if you haven't put those things in place, it can be daunting. It can be confusing at times as well too, but they are important. So certainly seek third-party support if it's something that isn't at play within your organization that you need to put in place correctly and quickly. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've collected information and gotten to know the organization's goals. We are mitigating risk and covering our butts along the way. What's the third one, Devan?
Now we want some wins. We want some quick victories, right? We're looking to build credibility in a new role. So what's the low-hanging fruit, right? What are some of the easy things that you can tackle and get done? What are the areas that are the pain points for the organization, especially if you're a brand new HR person coming into an organization where they haven't had HR. There's a reason they hired you, right? They've had certain issues or certain problems come up along the way. They've reached a point where they need HR. What are the reasons you were hired, and how can you tackle some of those, fairly quickly and start to build that credibility in your role? And, that's really crucial, and focus on, there's going to be some bigger things that may take time, but if there's some small things you can do fairly quickly, look for those quick wins where you can. I know for myself, entering a previous organization in manufacturing, which I mentioned earlier, I was doing all the hiring. And I came into this organization and I had a number of positions to fill right off the bat, right? There was a number of open positions ranging from production floor up to management. And I sort of analyzed and I spoke with a few people to understand, okay, what's the biggest pain point here right now, right? Because I can start and I can fill a couple positions fairly quickly, but I can't focus on everything at once. So what's the biggest pain point? And it was a director of quality assurance role that was partially in process, and they were really feeling the loss of that position. So I focused my efforts there right away, filled that position as quickly as I could, actually filled it within a few weeks, so quite quickly for a position at that level. It was a position that allowed me to actually work directly with the general manager. So we interviewed together, went through the process together. So not only was it a nice quick win for the organization, but I was able to build a bit of a relationship with, the top leader in the organization and gain some credibility with him as well right off the bat. So finding those quick wins and finding those opportunities that you can in the first few months, certainly.
Yeah, something meaningful. Like it's
Mhm.
very clear. You didn't say, "Oh, we should throw a barbecue," or "Oh, we should strike a social committee." Why wouldn't those things be a good idea if you're coming in and thinking that, "Oh, that's a quick victory."
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Look, a barbecue or a social event, it's never a bad idea. It can be a lot of fun. And it can be a great way to get people together. But the research shows that it doesn't actually impact engagement, right? It doesn't impact morale within the organization, the commitment level of the employees. If I go to a barbecue and I go, that's great, I got a free hot dog, I got a drink, got some food, but I go back to my desk and I'm 5 minutes late, and my boss comes and gets angry at me for being late or comes down on me for it, you know, I don't feel any more excited about the organization. I don't feel any more committed to the organization. My engagement level is the same, if not maybe even gone down a little bit from the way my boss has treated me. So we're not actually impacting anything. We're maybe having a good
Yeah.
time, but we're not really impacting the organization in that way. So,
Well,
you
going back to your example too, about the hiring piece, like let's pretend you came into that organization and said, instead of saying, "Oh, I'm going to look for the pain point and look for what needs to get solved," imagine if you had said, "Oh, my number one priority is a barbecue." That positions the gap and the skills needed for that position and what was actually being either shifted or backlogged or whatever was going on for the organization doesn't get solved by a barbecue. So if you're new and you're coming into an organization as an HR professional, don't consider those as part of your quick wins. That's something that's an extra, an nice add-on. And to be honest, is something that you can help empower perhaps someone else to do, because those are not the most ideal things to be on HR's plate. But examples like you gave, Devan, are impactful. It's something that impacted the organization in a meaningful way, so it could move forward without it being kind of just a band-aid or something extra that's a fun thing, but not a needed thing.
And that's a great point, Jaysa. I mean, I was actually talking with Brad, the president of Acuity, our boss, earlier this morning, a little bit about that idea of quick wins. And he reminded me of a story when he started at a previous company as their director of HR, coming in, replacing a previous HR person. He was the sole HR. And the first thing he did, because benefits is an area that he has a lot of experience and he understands, is he took a look at their benefits. And just by going to the insurer and negotiating directly with the insurer, he was able to immediately, without changing anything of the plan, save the organization $7,000 a month on premiums.
That's
And
huge.
so kind of to your point, I mean, what would the leaders of the organization rather see? $7,000 a month in savings on their premiums or a barbecue?
Well, and that's
Same
a
employee.
quantifiable step
Definitely.
towards goals as well too, because some of those extra barbecue things, they're not really quantifiable and not really, you can't connect them to what you're actually trying to achieve. And you've not only done that in a quick way, but also really justified from a financial perspective your position and what you're trying to accomplish. And you've shown that HR is more than that. And we see in a lot of organizations that either we've come into as consultants to help, or organizations that we have come in contact where HR's role is missing the mark, or it could be more and needs to be more. And that's definitely an example of how HR can be more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we have collecting meaningful information so that we can understand the goals of the organization. What was our second one, Devan?
Risk mitigation.
Risk
Cover your back.
mitigation. Exactly. And number three?
Number three is those quick victories, right? That low hanging fruit and starting to build that credibility. And there's ways to do that in the right way, and there's ways that sometimes I think we often see, and we've both seen this, Jason, where HR tends to fault themselves sometimes, where we tend to come in and want to be the firefighter and
Yeah.
solve all the problems, and we tend to want to have all those uncomfortable conversations and make sure they're done in the right way and solve all those problems. And unfortunately, when we do that, when employee problems come to us and we solve them, well, what happens the next time there's a problem? Is the employee going to go to their manager, or they're going to come to us in HR?
Mm-hmm.
And we often end up, you know unintentionally, because it's always done with good intentions, but we actually take away some of the authority and credibility from managers. And sometimes that means that managers end up resenting
Yeah.
HR, right? Because we're the hero, we come in and solve all the problems. So we have to be careful that with those quick wins and with those victories, and helping to resolve situations in the organization, that we're doing our part to support leaders, to coach them, to help them navigate these problems with their employees, but we're not doing it for them, right? We're holding
Yes.
them accountable to lead their people and ultimately build the relationship and build their credibility and authority as leaders with their team as well.
Yeah, we're creating that strength and that sustainability for other parts of the organization so that we can continue to tackle the things that make sense from an HR perspective and not put things onto our plate that don't, and not continue to kind of essentially guide managers and leaders down the direction of, oh, that's what HR does. Let's shuffle that stuff off to them. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. We have
absolutely.
Jane uses a great line in our leadership training program where she says you can't outsource caring, right? And often, leaders tend to outsource caring to HR, and we get to be the ones to care about employees. But ultimately, it's not enough for employees to know that the nice HR person down the hall cares about them. They have to know that their leader cares about them and has their back and supports them. So it's our job to make sure that we're supporting and guiding leaders to do that.
Exactly. And there's a lot from an HR perspective that leaders can do. It's just a matter of them having that understanding. And sometimes it takes a new person in HR, whether HR existed previously or HR is new, to help and educate and guide the organization so that they understand what HR's role is and how it can impact the organization.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. We have to help give them the tools.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Awesome. Well, I hope that those of you who have tuned into this have found this valuable. Again, this was top 3 tips so that we could share with you if you're new to an HR position, or newly coming into an HR role that an organization hasn't had HR before. What are the 3 things you need to consider first? Again, if you'd like to learn more about us, follow us on LinkedIn. You can feel free to connect with us individually on our pages. Also follow the Acuity page. Feel free also to follow us on Instagram, check out our website, sign up for our newsletter, all the good stuff, and join us again for another exciting conversation on Where Do I Start?